So I'm working on my model right now, the head model, or the demo, and I was noticing looking at it right here, kind of looking at this on the left side of the face here, that when I did a test render on this, and I have a plugin that kind of helps me with this, just kind of give me a test render with like nice lighting, or nice-ish lighting in Zbrush to kind of preview things. And I could see here, looking at that eye, it looks a little bit weird, a little, the stare's pretty strong, you know, and so I'm still working on I'm on my initial sculpt of this model here, but even so, it just looked a little bulbous here. And so on the right side, you can see I'm starting to add eyelashes. And working on a model, I think eyelashes goes a long way to help out. And so you can see here I've started on it. And if you recall, if you hold Control and Shift on your keyboard, this will come up. When you drag, a green box will come up, so that'll just help isolate areas of the model. So I'm going to do that right now, just Control Shift, just so we can isolate the eyes here for a moment. And then to get the back of the head out, I'll do the same thing, Control Shift, and then highlight the area that I want to just kind of focus on. And here, you can kind of see adding the eyelashes. I'm still in the process of adding these eyelashes, but it kind of adds up and helps out a lot in terms of kind of getting this looking believable. So one thing to always keep in mind when sculpting a face in Maya and Zbrush is the Uncanny Valley is real, you know, and so one reason that it's such a thing is because we're just trained just to know what a human face is supposed to look like exactly. So when something like eyelashes is missing, you know, sometimes that can show up here. So the way I've been doing these eyelashes here, and I'll kind of show you the process from the beginning here, but I just wanted to have that up. If you look under the Subtools menu, which is on the right here, Subtools is where you can have a bunch of different models in the same scene here. And so you can see I sculpted one eyelash, and I just keep duplicating and moving it over. So I have my eyes on this layer here, and I have my head on this layer right here, and then I made one eyelash and just started duplicating it around there. And so the way I made an eyelash in Zbrush here is under the Subtool menu, I went under Append. Append is how you add a new object or a new subtool. So I pressed Append, then I made a new Sphere 3D. So I did Append, and then went to Sphere 3D and clicked. And so in the Subtool menu, there's so many tools now, because I have so many eyelashes, but you can see here at the bottom it created Sphere 3D right there. And so I just modeled one eyelash. And so the way I did that is you can model an eyelash 1,000 different ways here, but the way I did it here is I just scaled it down a little bit and then scaled it forward to start to just kind of create the eyelash. I'm kind of doing it from the side here, and press draw there. And from here, I might want to do the move tool, which is, I already have it selected, but under the brushes, just look for M, and then look for the move tool, so M and then V. And here I'll make the brush size pretty large. And this isn't going to get it perfect by any stretch, but I'm just trying to get that curve of the eyelash, just generally speaking here. And so the way that I modeled this, because that kind of looks like a finger right now or something, is I use the trim. So I'll press the move tool, and press trim, and then I use the trim curve tool, and this is going to give you this error message. So it kind of changes the Control Shift function on your keyboard, and it takes a little practice to get used to this. So you press Control and then Shift, and then that trim curve will show up. So it's the same as that green box that we did before to isolate an area. So Control and Shift, and when you draw, it gives you this little line right here, which might be hard to see because my ZBrush has like a black outline behind it here. but it helps you slice. So you do Control Shift, and here, if I want to create curves in this line, I just tap Option. So I'll tap Option, and you see here it made a point there. And if I want to create a hard point, I can double tap it, and it creates like a hard edge like that. And you can see here that you can kind of trim it out. So I'm going to Edit Undo, and then I'm going to do Control Shift, press Option, press Option, press Option, and then I'll let it go, and you see it trimmed out that area. So I'm going to, and it depends, it matters which way it's pointing right now. So since it's aiming that way, it trimmed on that side. But if I draw it the other way, so I drew it from top to bottom, now I'll draw it from bottom to top. You see, it cropped out the whole eyelash there. So just trim it. Then I'll do the same thing down here, pressing the Option button. Not my best work. Let's see here. So I can press the Shift button to kind of sculpt this a little bit more. You know, these eyelashes are going to be tiny, so, you know, it's hard to argue that you need to get it perfect. I might use the Move tool just to kind of get it out of the way a little bit so I can see it a little better. So I'm continuing to use the Trim Curve tool. Oops. So pressing the Option button, trim out that side. Then I'll do the same. I drew it from the bottom to the top. Now I'll need to draw it from the top to the bottom here. Oops. Just did the Mask tool by mistake. So Control Shift, then tap Option, just to get a little bit of a curve there. I'm going to try this again. Option, Option, let it go. Okay, you know, so that's just one way to, you can kind of carve out an eyelash. Whoa. And so from there, what I did is I just kind of made that basic shape. Mine was a little more rounded than this, so I used the Trim Dynamic tool a little bit less on my version. You can even use the Shift tool if you want to kind of get it to have a little less hard edges. There's many ways you can model this eyelash. You don't have to do it the way I just did it there. And then from there, I just moved it into place and just physically placed it one at a time. So I'm using the Move tool. When I press the Move tool, I can scale it from the center to scale it universally. This works a lot like the Move tool in Maya. And so I'm just manually positioning it in place. Scaling it way down. And to kind of see what I'm doing a little bit better, I might need to use the Control Shift tool again to kind of use the green box to trim out the rest of the head so I can navigate my camera a little bit better. But you can see that changed when I did the brush. So I'm going to press Control Shift, click up here, and press the Select Rectangle. And so now, hopefully, yep, when I do the green box, it kind of works again. But you see the green box didn't hide anything there just for me, but that's because the head's not selected. So I'm going to select the head, Control Shift, hide the rest of the head that I don't need. And now, I'm going to, in the Subtool menu, go back down to that eyelash that I'm placing, so it's right here. I'll select it. I'll press F to frame it up. Remember that F button works in Zbrush and Maya the exact same way here. And so here, I'll press that Move button again, and I can just continue to place the eyelash. And so what I was showing you just there was just kind of how I went about making an eyelash. I didn't do that for each eyelash, right? So I just made one eyelash and try to give it like a little bit of random rotation here, as you can. And once it's placed, I'll press Draw just to look at it. And then when I'm ready to duplicate it, under here, under the subtool menu, I'll scroll down, and it's right here. Underneath, in the subtool menu is duplicate. So press duplicate. And when you press duplicate, it made a duplicate here, but it turned off the visibility on the object we just duplicated, so you might need to turn that eye back on to get it visible again. But then from here, I'll just press the move tool and move out that duplicate. And I'll use these controls to kind of place it, rotate it however it needs to be. Want to give it a little bit of randomness for each eyelash. And when that's done, just kind of keep working here, duplicating again and again. And once you have it, having these eyelashes, it goes pretty quick once you kind of get into a rhythm of it. You know, making the eyelash takes a minute, but then after that, you're just duplicating, moving it over. I like to check it from this view, and then at least check it from one other view, you know, maybe from the side, something like that. Again, using the Control-Shift tool to kind of hide the area of the head that I don't need helps me navigate the camera, because if I want to rotate, I have to click in an area where the model's not present, typically. And so that's the process. So you just kind of keep going, rinse and repeat. These are just models that I'm doing, you know, real simple models that I'm using for the eyelashes. There's nothing too crazy going on there, but I think it adds a lot. And I got construction going on outside. So sorry for the noise. Here, or the neighborhood has construction going on, I should say. So to bring back the visibility, I need to, in the subtool menu, go back to the head, press Control-Shift, drag outside of where the head might be. Maybe just click outside. And so you can see here, I still have work to do on these eyelashes. It's not quite where I want it to go quite yet, but you can start to see that this eye is starting to look a lot more realistic than that eye, just as we go here. And so I start doing this eyelash process. I'm still pretty early in my model here, but I like to kind of do it at this stage once I've kind of feel like I have things kind of largely set into place, and it'll just help me kind of make my decisions as I go forward here. Okay, picking up where I left off here. So where we left off, I had made some eyelashes and started duplicating them. And so you can see here, when you look in the subtool menu, there's a lot of layers in there, and I've already started condensing these. So I started this process I'm about to show, but I want to merge these eyelashes down into one shape just so I can kind of make this a little less cluttered in here. So I'll click that eyeball button, and since I'm selected off of it, you see those eyelashes disappeared. If I click the eyeball button again, it should come back. And I have one eyelash above it here, and then all these layers below it are more eyelashes. And so the way that I'm going to merge all these eyelashes here with this group is in the subtool menu right here. I'm going to drag down, and I'm going to look for this merge menu within subtools, and then making sure that I have this one selected, I'm going to press merge down, and so each time I merge down, it's going to merge this layer in with that one. I'll press it again, and it'll repeat for each of these eyelashes here. So you'll kind of see them start to disappear up here as I do it. So I have the group selected, and I'll press merge down, and just kind of keep clicking it. And so merge down just merges whichever layers are below it with the layer that you have selected there. So I'm going to click it 2 more times. And so now I have all the eyelashes merged on one layer, except for I have one eyelash just kind of hanging out on its own, just in case I want to kind of duplicate some more eyelashes in this area, for instance. So just to see it, I have the group of eyelashes selected. I'll press the eyeball. It doesn't disappear yet because the layer is selected, so I need to click off of it, and you'll see it disappear there. So that's how you can kind of merge those eyelashes together. And the way I would do this is just, I'm kind of only doing one eye here, and then we can mirror it here But when I bring this into Maya, I'll probably just export this model here and mirror it over in Maya because it's a little easier over there. Let's see here. So, looking at this model, all I've done so far in this model from the base model that you've seen in previous lessons here is I used the move tool, and then I used the clay tubes tool, or sorry, the move brush, and then if you click on that and press C and then T, you get the clay tubes brush right here. And so I've just been using mainly the move tool and the clay brush tool to kind of build up this model. And with the clay brush tool, I keep the Z intensity at 7, so you can find the Z intensity right here. That's the strength of the brush. Keep in mind I'm using a Wacom tablet as well, and I'm using a pretty light touch as I sculpt here. So whenever you see this menu come up right here, I'm pressing spacebar, and that brings up all the stuff that I could probably ever need here. So using the clay tubes brush, I have the Z intensity at 7. You have the draw size here, so that's the size of the brush. The focal shift is right here. That slider right there is this inner circle right there, which deals with the slope of the brush. So if the focal shift is like that, it's going to be more of a gradual. Oh, whoops! I need to make sure I have the head selected, so I'm sculpting on it. I also want to make sure I have symmetry on, so let me just make sure symmetry is on. It is. If you want to add symmetry, it's under transform, activate symmetry right there, or you can press X on your keyboard. So pressing X on your keyboard brings it off and on again. So back to that point. So the focal shift, I have at a gradual slope, so you can see it's kind of got a gradual shape to it there. And then if I take the focal shift and I move it so that it's close to the edge, when I do it, it's going to have a harder edge right there. So with the clay brush tool, I'll kind of set it something like this. And I have the Z intensity set at, somewhere between 3 and 7. I have it set it really light when I'm working in it. And then my computer's slowing down on me a little bit, but as I brush it in, it's like a pretty gradual step, and I'm just doing a lot of brush strokes really quick as I operate there. And I'm not going to show it too much. I think the fact that I have QuickTime doing a screen capture right now is slowing down my computer, so it's going to be hard for me to demonstrate that at this particular moment because things are lagging for me. So let me take this opportunity to there's a few things I want to show here. So this is how I kind of do my initial sculpting here. I just keep it loose with the clay build-up tool here. And, if you don't want your character to look like this, with all that texture on them, the process here, or the process that I use, I should say, is I use the clay brush, or the clay tubes tool to kind of sketch in the shape and kind of work quickly and not get obsessed with like little details and stuff like that. And while I'm sculpting, I'll do the Control Shift button. So if I'm working on the eyes, I'll hold down Control and Shift, and then if you drag, you get that green box right there. And then now when I press F, when I'm rotating around, I can kind of focus my camera more easily on these smaller regions right here. So that's kind of how I got to this point. And so let's just say that you want to take this model and you don't want it to kind of look wrinkly like that. One thing you can do is I kind of use the clay brush tool as the kind of the loose build-up, if you recall. And here, I'm just going to clean this up for a sec. So under the Geometry tab, which is right underneath the Subtool tab, I'll click that. And be sure to save your work before you do this. So I save incrementally, so I'm on version 17 right now, head version 17, and I just save rapidly as I'm working. Like I have 17 versions, but I've not been working on that this long here. So if I want to get rid of the wrinkles here, what I do is you could just hold down Shift and smooth the whole thing, but what I like to do is I like to, under Geometry, under the subdivision level, I'll bring it down back to subdivision 1. And I've been using the clay build-up tool. I've been kind of like blurring my eyes as I sculpt a little bit. And so I'm trying to get it so that as I'm sculpting, you know, I'm getting the shape of the model right. And so one thing I'll do is I'll take the subdivision maybe all the way down to 1. I might try 2 first, but I think 1 is going to be what I want here. Just depends how much detail you want to keep on this thing. And then I'll just delete the higher subdivision. So I had it up to subdivision 5 here, and that might take a second to catch up. But I don't want or need any of that detail that I have there. So I'll bring it down to 2. I'll probably most likely bring this all the way down to 1, but we'll see. But let's try 2. And I'll press delete higher. So now all that extra subdivisions, they're gone. And so now I'll divide it back again. And you see when I divide it back, it does still have those wrinkles in there, because I left it at subdivision 2, but you can see it's a lot less severe in there. What I might do for this model, let me just see what this looks like when it's at subdivision 1. So I bring it all the way down to subdivision 1, and then I'll delete higher. And so now, when I divide, you see all that texture from the clay tubes is gone. And then I'll just kind of do a second pass of sculpting here. So I can see here, one thing that happened is my mouth, I had it closed, and it kind of opened up during the smooth process. It's actually not too bad. But one thing I might want to do is make it so I can close the mouth. And I'm going to do a whole, for my project here, I'm going to do a whole second pass here, sculpting. But to kind of start this off, if I want to close this mouth, for instance, that can be a little tricky a lot of times because you'll want to use your move tool. Now working at a slightly lower subdivision level here. So I'm clicking my brush, then pressing M, and then V, or finding it right there. But you can see here, when I move the upper lip, you see how it moves the bottom lip as well? So one thing you can do to avoid that is you can use the masking tool to help you out. So to use the mask, you just hold Control. When you hold Control, it draws in black where there's a mask there. If you want to invert the mask, you just click, continuing to hold Control, I'll just click outside of the model right there, and you see how it inverts it right there. If I want to release the mask, I'll hold Control, and then I'll drag it outside of the model, and it'll disappear. And then finally, say I'm drawing a mask here, and I want to erase some of the mask, is I'll press Option, so Control and Option at the same time, and that'll erase some of the mask. And if you recall, Option is how you subtract when you're modeling normally here. And if I want to release that mask, I'll just click and drag outside of it here. So let's say I want to move that upper lip to match, to kind of come down on the lower lip a little bit. One thing I can do is I can hold Control, start with a small brush. I can, hold Control on my keyboard and start drawing in a mask here. Additionally, a mask doesn't have to be the brush tool. So I hold Control, you see how my brush goes from the move tool right there to the mask tool right there, the mask brush. So holding Control, I'll click there, and I can make it a lasso tool. I can do a rectangle. I might try a rectangle here. So I changed it to rectangle, so I'll hold Control again, and now I see it's a rectangle instead of a pen. So I'm just going to drag this here. I'm trying not to get that upper lip. That's kind of my main goal right there. And if I didn't get it all the way, and it looks like I didn't quite get it, an additional trick I can do is if I can hold Control Shift, that's that, you remember the green box? So I can kind of hide layers and stuff like that. So I can do Control Shift and just hide the rest of the model, except for what I want to work on here. Now I can hold Control, and I might go back to using the mask brush, or the mask pen, and I can draw on that lower lip. And now I'll reveal the rest of the model again, which is Control and Shift. That's the green box. And if I just tap out of there, it'll bring it back. So now, when I use the move tool on this upper lip, this lower lip is masked off, it won't be affected. So I can use a big brush. So normally both of them dragged, but since the mask is on the lower lip, I don't have to worry about it overlapping on top of it, or both of them dragging at the same time. So I'll just kind of patiently just drag it little by little. I'm not doing this with one big drag or anything like that. And then when I'm done, I'll just press Control and drag outside of it. And I have a closed mouth there. I think I went a little too far closing it. So I'm going to edit undo. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So I just undid a few steps because I like it having a little bit of space. Just, you know, keep it a really small amount of space here. And so here, there's a few things that I want to work out with this. So I can press, now we're kind of moving on to the next stage of sculpting. I did the clay buildup stage where I was just really trying to find the shapes here. But you can see here there's some things like this little bevel right there, which is not quite right the way I want it. So if I hold shift, I have the smooth tool available to me. So I can kind of work that out a little bit. I might want to move up another geometry. Sorry, another subdivision under geometry there. And I continue to use the clay tubes tool here to kind of build up these shapes a little bit, but just during this next stage of sculpting, I might, after I do it, I'll hold shift to smooth my work. So I might kind of take divots out of the model, but then, whoa, but then I'll do some cleanup on it as well. Kind of like that. And so I still haven't UV'd my model, so I'm not going to go like too crazy with this. I'm just mainly concerned with getting like the main shape of this thing as close as possible to what I want it to be. So this will need a little bit more work, and so I'll probably do that a little bit off screen here. But again, I'm using the standard brush. I might use the clay tubes brush, and it'll smooth things out. And when I export my model, I'm probably going to export this model at this second subdivision level right here, which is pretty high. If you want it to be an animated character or a stylized character, the subdivision level might be good, but I'm kind of going for something a little more naturalistic or something like that. And so that subdivision level could be okay, but that'll be a debate that I'll have to make with myself here. But one of those two subdivision levels is what I'm going to do. And so let's kind of move on to here. So I have Symmetry on right now, and that same masking tool, we're going to use that to create hair here. So I might move my geometry up to 4. The higher the geometry, the higher resolution the hair will come out, but it's not super important that it's high. So maybe a 3. So I'll hold Control, and remember you can use the Lasso tool, or you can change the brush tool. So if you hold Control, you get that. And wherever we draw in is where the hair is going to show up. So I'm going to hold Control, and I could just brush the whole thing in here. You might want to turn perspective off just for a moment while I do this, but just remember to turn it back on later. If I hold Control and I go back up here, I can use the Lasso tool. And using the Lasso tool, I can just kind of draw in where I want the hair to go. So you can kind of draw it in like that. Keep some space around the ear. You don't want to extrude any of the ear here. And so I kind of give it some space. And I don't get this perfect because we're just trying to get a rough extraction here to work with. It's a little hard to see my model here. So one thing you need to do here, so I have my mask drawn, is if I can open up Chrome, if it'll let me, is I need to find like a reference image of what I want this hair to look like. I recommend not just kind of going off your own memory here. So female haircut maybe, let's see. So do more research that I'm doing here. I'm just trying to kind of get a gauge of the way hair might move here as I work. Oops. But have an idea, have a plan on what you want to do. But anyway, this is the base of the hair that I want to do here. And so I if you recall, I just use the control to draw out the mask. And then under subtools, we're going to go under subtools, and at the very bottom of the subtools, there's this extract menu. So right here, we have extract, where it'll extract wherever that curve tool, or sorry, wherever that mask tool has been drawn. So I press extract, and you can see it extracts a new model out right there. And until I press accept, it won't do it. So if I rotate it, it'll disappear. And I actually want this to be a bit thicker. It kind of looks crazy right now, but it'll just be easier to work with if it's thicker. If it's thin, the geometry will pull in on top of itself when you start moving it around and shaping it. So I kind of like to start out with it a bit thicker here. So give it some thickness. That might be a little, just a tiny bit too thick. Let me try again. Okay. And so when I got it, I'll press accept. And so now we have this new subtool that's on top of this. And there's a mask still drawn on this new subtool, which you can see here. I'll rename it as hair. And I'll press Control and just drag out of it to deselect it. And so hair is almost never symmetrical. So I've been using symmetry with the face, but with the hair, what I might want to do is turn symmetry off. So go to transform, then turn off symmetry. And with the hair, it's not going to be a quick process. It takes a bit of work, but let me just show you what to do here. So the main thing we're going to be using is the move tool. So I'll press the brush and go M and then V. Get the brush nice and big here. And under geometry, what you want to do is we want to turn on Dynamesh. We're going to use Dynamesh, and then we're going to use Z-Remesher for this step. So Dynamesh, I'll just turn it on. Oh, but before I turn it on, let's press Shift F, and you can kind of see what this topology is doing. And then I'll press Dynamesh, and you can see the geometry starts to kind of adapt to the shape of things. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start pulling on this thing and shaping it out. And I'm being pretty loose here with the model. And this is going to be a little rough, you know. I didn't really plan out very much what I'm going to do with this hair, so try to plan out your hair as best as you can. But here, you see, so the mesh is still kind of, when I grab it, it drags, even though Dynamesh is still on. So in order for Dynamesh to work, okay, it's giving me an autosave. That's fun. In order for Dynamesh to work, you just need to, let's just give it a second here. You need to do a step for the mesh to update with Dynamesh on. Come on, Zbrush. I don't need you to save right now. Okay. So, in order for Dynamesh to work, just hold Control and drag outside of the model here. So you see the mesh looks like that, and I want Dynamesh to do its thing. So I'll hold down Control, like I'm doing a mask almost, and then outside of the model, I'll just hold in Control, drag out like that, release, and the mesh updates. So here, I'm just going to keep using the move tool, and I'm just kind of staying loose and free with this thing, trying to find the shape that I want. So I'm going to give this character kind of long hair. And then when I want the mesh to update, I'll just press Control and drag outside of the model. And I need to decide what I want this hair to be doing on this side. So whenever you see the mesh update, I'm holding Control and dragging it outside of the model there. And I have the wireframe on. You can press Shift plus F to kind of get rid of the wireframe there. Oh shoot, I got a little messy here in that lower area. That's the problem with Dynamesh, is sometimes it can get a little messy when it's trying to figure out what it wants to do. And once you have the shape of the hair kind of where you want it to go, I'm just going to do a little bit more work on this thing. Maybe increase the brush size a little bit. Once you have it kind of roughed out the way you want it to be, I'll turn Dynamesh off here under the Geometry tab. So just under Dynamesh, I click that button right there to turn it off. And then under Z Remesher, I'm going to try pressing Z Remesher right here and see what this does to the model. It should take the topology and bring it down a bit here and kind of change the flow to match this new model shape here. So you see here it's having to think about it for a second. Do you see here? So it just did it. So the geometry just changed. And it did a little bit of cleanup for me. And it kind of changed the topology back to something pretty usable back in my eye here, which is great. And let me just check the bottom of this model. So it's got a little bit of weird remnants happening there, but that's some cleanup that we can kind of save for Maya. And so here we have the shape. So I'll press Shift F or go into Transform and then this button right here to turn off that wireframe on the model. So you can kind of see here that I kind of shaped the hair. And so let's, you know, we don't want to leave it at this because it looks like she's wearing a blanket on her head. So a helpful tool that I find here is rather than clay tubes, I like to use clay buildup here. And I have the shortcut memorized. I can't even see it up here because Zbrush is cutting it off. But as clay buildup, if you can't see it in your menu, it's C, then B under the brush tool. And here with the hair selected, I might just divide the geometry a little bit. And here it's good to think about the flow of the hair as you're sculpting. And again, I didn't really do much planning on this hair. So I'm just going to start working, and it's going to be, you know, it should be a fair amount of work. I think the temptation a lot of times with hair is just to kind of move past it and kind of rush through it. But I think a lot of detail here can go a long way in terms of the sculpt. It kind of depends what kind of model you're doing. And I might need to continue to use the move tool to shape this thing out. So one thing that can be good too is during this step to kind of find your large strands here, the kind of the flow that you want to use for the hair, and kind of discover that in some of these early steps here. Oops. By mistake, I pressed the wrong shortcut and my whole model turned black. If you look here, if I just drag it back up to there, it'll reappear again for me. And so here, I might want to use the move tool to just kind of continue to shape this thing out the way that I want. And kind of how you sculpt this kind of depends on the style that you want this hair to be. Like if you want it to be stylized, you might want to start messing around once you've kind of made some of your moves here and kind of develop this a bit further than I have. I'm getting a little gritty there with my geometry. Is the trim dynamic tool. So brush and then trim dynamic, you can kind of start to kind of get some cool bevels here. So if I'm going for like more of a stylized haircut here, if I increase the brush size, you know, I can use brushes like that. Maybe so that's the trim dynamic. So the trim dynamic, it flattens things out as you brush along them. The standard brush, when used with a large brush size, you can use to kind of, it's a good Z intensity. You can use to kind of give volume to the hair there, you see here. So I have the standard brush. So if I want to give this thing a little volume back, out here. Oops, went a little too much there. Just to kind of add some volume into the situation. And then, so that's the standard brush. So I showed you the trim dynamic, which is right there. Trim adaptive is exactly like the trim dynamic, except for it kind of flattens it out in whichever angle you start your brush stroke. So right there, kind of flattens it out at that angle. This is really good for futuristic armor, because you can kind of make like some cool bevels like that. But if you want something kind of stylized in some kind of way, shape, or form, using that and the can sometimes be like a pretty cool brush to work with. So you see here, it kind of makes these big bevels right there, which is better for armor, I would say. You can kind of get some similar results with trim dynamic, but it flattens as you brush along the model in that case. That looks a little wild, you know, but I'm just trying to show you that like essentially different brushes do different things in here. So I'm going to edit and undo some of these steps here. So I went a little crazy with the trim adaptive brush. And so the clay buildup is good for building up strands. Oops. So brush C, B, it's clay buildup. So you can kind of start to build up some strands here. And yeah, there's not really, at least that I know of, a super easy, quick way to do this, unless you just get really loose and sloppy with it, you know. No cheat codes, that's kind of what I mean by that. So it just kind of depends on what style you want to do for the hair here. So there's a lot of brushes at your disposal, but those are kind of the steps to kind of get the hair started on your model here. And also showed in today's lesson, which I'm probably gonna have to edit together a good amount here, so apology in advance for the edits, is the eyelashes, how I kind of start out my model and how I kind of bring it back to this kind of smooth position here by taking the geometry down, deleting the higher subdivisions, and then smoothing it back, and then kind of doing a second pass at this thing before I bring it in for bring it in to UV it. But I think this model is getting pretty close to being ready to UV here. I might just make a few more small changes to it, but it's really close here. And yeah, so, and that's kind of how I generally kind of go about sculpting hair. I was a little sloppy with this one, but I'm just kind of trying to give you the idea of how to go about it here.